I've not even got it on the right branding or anything here. So
Oh yeah,
we're still alive, are we, Ronnie?
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
good.
still alive.
Well, that was a real throwback, Ronnie, because you remember when you used to overtax your machine and you click on something, it'd all go white and it'd say not responding. Do you remember that?
No, yes,
Yeah. Well, it did that, and I've not seen that for years.
No.
Yeah.
No,
so,
you get like the circle of death, don't you, and stuff like
yeah,
that going
it kind
round
of
and
goes
round.
Expose a shill. Recently on Twitter, an account by the name of Greg Onelove commented on a post about animal rights activism by David Rams, saying the following: "I've been vegan for over a decade. It works for me and my family, but we don't try and push our lifestyle on others. The vegan activists pushing veganism online feels disingenuous at best. Paid influencers propagandizing and shaming people for eating meat. This does not help the cause." I replied to this account calling out their hypocrisy, given that their entire profile was comprised of speaking out against injustice, just in a human context, and telling them that by their logic, they're quote unquote not helping the cause. No sooner had I wrote that comment and the account had blocked me, but wait, that's not it. Shortly after this happened, something came to my mind that I decided to formulate a Twitter thread about. I had a theory that this could perhaps be a shill tactic. This is how it would work. An account claiming to be vegan gathers up followers and engages with the vegan community. This person pretending to be a vegan, while commenting positively on, say, vegan food posts and whatnot, comments negatively on animal rights posts, telling them to rein in their advocacy, while purporting that effective veganism is about keeping it to yourself and just leading by example. The account, deflecting and projecting that the following is actually true of themselves, then accuses animal rights activists with influential platforms of being paid influencers, thus creating a culture of disharmony and infighting in the animal rights movement, further creating a culture of apologism where the normalised vegan message is just to, stay quiet and respect others' choices. This is, after all, ultimately what the industries want, right? They don't want us to speak up and be effective. That's why I always tell apologists that they're just the type of vegans Big Ag loves. Now this is where it gets weird. Within minutes of me posting the Twitter thread stating my theory, the entire account was deleted. The timing of this was so suspect that David Rams himself sent me a DM saying that he thinks I've just exposed the shill, without me even saying this to him myself. Now before you turn off the video, there is a critically important message that our movement can learn from this, and depending on who you are, it might just pull your whole world apart and change the way that you see vegan advocacy. Assuming these suspicions are right, and this was indeed an undercover account being paid in some way to infiltrate and disrupt the animal rights movement, with the shill behind it deleting the account before we could do some digging on it and get onto them, what does this tell us about the way we are often told to advocate as vegans, including by other vegans? Us vocal vegans have heard it all before, not only from non-vegans, but also from vegans, that we are pushing people away by so-called preaching, and that a much more effective way to get people on board is simply to share recipes or, light-hearted videos. Now it's obvious why non-vegans would say this. This is simply a lie and a psychological defense mechanism to get us to advocate in a way that makes them feel as comfortable and not guilty as possible in their choice to harm animals, so that they can continue eating that bacon sandwich in peace without a care in the world. But why on earth would vegans say it? After all, it was only through such advocacy that we became vegan. Guilt is necessary in order for someone to change. Without feeling bad about harming animals, veganism does not exist. That's why you'll never meet a vegan who went vegan because they saw a cupcake recipe they liked. The notion that people would do that is utter bullshit and insulting to our intelligence. While it's absolutely true that great plant-based food pages on social media have their place in helping people make the switch, ask any vegan you know why they went vegan, and we all say the same thing. Earthlings, Dominion, Gary's speech, an Earthling Ed video, a Joey Carbstrong video, a Tash Peterson disruption. These things turned us vegan because, well, we felt like hypocritical animal abusers after watching them, and without that, why would we even change? What is even making us choose the vegan cupcake when perfectly tasty non-vegan cupcakes exist? If not the chicks being macerated to make the eggs in them, and the horrendous guilt we feel for funding this evil. In case you haven't got what I'm getting at, it's this. Could apologist vegans who tell us not to advocate in such a way that makes people feel bad, who tell us to just post cupcake recipes and other stuff, be paid shills themselves? Infiltrators disrupting the movement, trying to create a culture where the vegan mantra goes from end the animal holocaust to respect others' choices. Think about it, Big Ag is an extremely powerful entity with a lot of money at its disposal. With that also comes psychological research that they can afford to look into that enlightens them as to the best ways to disrupt our movement. Essentially, Big Ag might even know better than we do about what works and what doesn't in getting people to go vegan. They have all the money, the power and the personnel to have the secrets on their side. Could it even be that the apologist vegans who actually aren't shills and are indeed vegan are just parroting a mantra that Big Ag has put out there as nothing more than a psyop to slow down the progress of the movement? What if the Big Ag propaganda machine is the reason that even vegans fall for the BS lie of you'll push people further away by showing slaughterhouse footage, and this is all just a lie Big Ag has put out there because they know that such things as slaughterhouse footage is actually what works in turning people vegan? I mean, the correlation between the rapid growth of veganism with the proliferation of digital media is telling. The reason there are more vegans now than ever before is precisely because we can now see these very horrific videos that apologists and non-vegans are telling us not to share. If this is all true, this could perhaps be my most important video yet. So please remember to share the video if you think that we could be onto something here. The ramifications of this are significant to the ethos of our movement and the way that we advocate from now on.
Right. Joanna Wells said, a stuffed pepper turned me vegetarian. A long but true story. I'm hearing George here, and I believe in big slaughter infiltrating, but it contradicts what Faunalytics found about what is influential. Well, yeah, I mean, I think we might come back to that idea because, you know, George is saying kind of what works.
Yes.
And he's got an answer to that, which is just one thing. And of course, so I think he might be misunderstanding some part of it, but that's kind of jumping ahead. So where do you want to start with this, Ronnie?
Well, I think it's I think he may well be right. It would be no surprise to me at all that that Big Ag was employing these tactics, because infiltration is by no means a new thing. It goes back a long time. It goes back a long time, a very long time in terms of, like, social movements for a fairer society, doesn't it? And it even goes back a long time in terms of the animal liberation movements, both in terms of infiltration by the state and infiltration by business, by corporate interests. And we have where we see the police spies, as in this article, I think was in the Guardian, wasn't it, some while ago? That would be infiltration by the state.
That's and way back, yeah.
And I think this kind of, this goes back to, in this article, goes back to the early 70s, doesn't it? When
it goes back to 68, I think.
68, when the state began infiltrating left-wing groups. And I suppose to a certain extent they kind of infiltrated some right-wing groups as well, but not never to the same extent. And I think that's where we have the people who control the state have a certain ideology, and anything that they see as a serious threat to that particular ideology, they'll try to they'll try to combat that. They'll try to weaken that force for change, obviously to maintain the status quo. So that's kind of where you get infiltration by the state, because I think that left-wing groups kind of, you could say, yes, they are a threat to threat to big business. They are a threat to corporate interests in a sense, but it's across like a very, very general and broad front, and so you probably wouldn't have so much interest from business and industry infiltrating those groups. It would come more from a state that had that was run by by people with a certain ideology. But I think we saw where we saw corporate infiltration. Really, the earliest I remember of that would be to do with the McDonald's campaign. The campaign against McDonald's, where some animal rights activists and stroke environmentalists launched a campaign, didn't they? And this would have been
the McLibel thing.
Yeah, the McLibel thing, and they were urging people not to. What was the slogan they used to urge people not to support McDonald's? But I can't quite remember exactly what that was. But they it resulted in McDonald's placing their own.
What's wrong with McDonald's?
What's wrong with McDonald's? That's right. Yes, what's wrong with McDonald's? And in fact, there was loads of things wrong with McDonald's in different ways, and there still is. But that caused McDonald's to actually infiltrate the groups that were campaigning against their company, and McDonald's placed infiltrators in those groups. And so this because those groups, and I think particularly it was a group called London Greenpeace who produced the leaflet "What's Wrong with McDonald's." They were the kind of main.
Yeah, I've got an entire time tunnel about it, Ronnie.
Yes, yeah. Oh, that's right. Yes, you have. Yes, and there's actually a video. I've been molested by a cat as usual. There's actually a video on YouTube about the whole thing, and so there was kind of there was corporate infiltration of that campaign, because that campaign was a threat to a particular corporation.
So this is that thing that we couldn't find before, Ronnie.
Yes,
so they start here. This is the Spy Cops site, and they start in 1968 as well.
Yes, and they started off infiltrating, because of course we didn't have a this is Tilly, by the way, this one. And Tilly will give me a bit of a nip if I don't stroke her, so I've got to be a bit careful.
All right, you've got to do your stroking.
I've got to carry on stroking her and not stop, otherwise she kind of.
Since we're talking about McDonald's, and this is interesting, because I'm interested in who exactly is George Martin talking about, because like you said, Spy Cops, that's the state, that's the police.
Yes, Spy Cops was the state.
I don't think that George Martin's video was about this, because
no, I'm
not even sure that the police would even infiltrate our movement anymore, because we're not a threat anymore. I mean, like.
The infiltration was
any coppers down at kind of Camp Beagle?
I mean, there may be, I mean, there may be, but
what about Animal Rising? Would there be any cops in there now?
Yes, I think they did infiltrate. They didn't infiltrate Animal Rising meetings. I mean, they were infiltrated by journalists. But
but that's what I'm getting at, Ronnie. Who are we talking about? So you've got the state, then you've got the groups that you're talking about as well. You know, the industry, and then
Yes.
you've got individuals. So those are the
Then you
three.
got the media as well looking for a story, and that's what. But you see, Animal Rising are, you know, they're a kind of disruptive group. You know, as were Animal Rebellion, who kind of came before them, and so they would kind of be an interest, I think, from the state to infiltrate them as a preventative measure, because when they carry out their actions, that involves the police. The police have to kind of deal with it and everything. And if they can kind of preempt that, they're going to be keen to do that. So there is an interest from the state in infiltrating groups like that. And this is really where the state began to do the infiltration of the animal liberation movement. That maybe, I don't know, perhaps that started perhaps late 70s, perhaps early 80s. And it was because of groups like the Animal Liberation Front that were causing, you know, huge amounts of damage and disruption, and so it was in the interests of the state to infiltrate those groups, and that's really where the spy cops thing comes from. That was actually state infiltration rather than corporate infiltration.
But the Matt Libel thing is interesting because there's obviously both there, in the sense that there's that funny kind of detail that it was found that in some meetings there was more spies, McDonald's and police than campaigners. Yes, right? So
it's spying on each other because they may not all have known who each other were. May if they were state.
Are you familiar with Reagan's empty cages? Because he puts things down to around about 1989, right? And he says this is the most recent chapter of this kind of issue. So this is not necessarily infiltration, but it's this kind of organized business attempt to discredit, which I suppose is another thing. Because I mean, like Alan Newbury Street, he was a hunter. He blew up his own Land Rover with the nail bomb.
Yes, and it's kind of, it's all very close, and that in a sense is very close to what George said in his video, in that you've got that's an attempt to discredit activism, isn't it? You know, those social media posts are an attempt to discredit activism and deter people from activism. So this idea of discrediting is the same in that sense.
Yeah, well, let me read you what Reagan says. He says, it began in 1989 with the publication of the American Medical Association's white paper, The Use of Animals in Biomedical Research, the Challenge and the Response. Among the AMA's recommendation, people who believe in animal rights must be shown to be not only anti-science, but also responsible for violence and illegal acts that endanger life and property, and B, a threat to the public's freedom of choice. ARA's, animal rights advocates, must be seen, this is what they want us to be seen as people who are radicals, militants, and terrorists who are opposed to human well-being. By contrast, sane, sensible, decent people must be shown to favor animal welfare, understood as humane, responsible use of other animals by humans for humans. And so, I mean, the example of this that I know about in Dublin was when all these industry bods got together and at a hotel in a place called Ballsbridge, of all places, and there were circus proprietors there. There was people from the research industry. There was people from the meat trade, people from the slaughterhouses and everything. And they came up with this slogan that, these animal rights extremists, what they're looking for is a meat-free, pet-free world. So they thought that they could scare people by saying, these people want to take your pets away from you.
Yeah.
Right? You know, and so
I mean, the only thing similar to that, in a sense, that I remember here in the UK was there's a group called Protest, who were pro animal experiments, and they arose out of the
good name,
campaign.
isn't it? Protest.
Yeah, it was started by some spotty youth in his bedroom, apparently, and kind of spread.
Yeah, they all looked about 12, didn't they?
Yeah, but it was taken up by the vivisection community and supported by the vivisection community, and it was in response to the campaign to prevent the primate research laboratory being built in Oxford. It's the Speak campaign. It was kind of in response to that, and they held a march through Oxford, and they were it was mainly animal researchers and students that supported animal experiments that took part. But there were also members of the hunt. There were members of the hunt that joined that march. There was I remember a guy, the video of it, photos of it. There's a guy in full hunting attire marching along. So there was some kind of an alliance there between the oppressors of other animals. I mean, not to the same extent as what happened in Ireland, but that did happen to some extent here.
Yeah. Well, also, I just want to kind of outline the kind of scope of what we're talking about too. This is from the Gouda book that I've mentioned a few times, called Animal Rights, the Focus and Scope of a Radical Social Movement. Now, this guy is a professor of agriculture, and it says even on the back that from his position as a moderate, so he takes a moderate welfare position, but he's got a chapter 11, which is really quite interesting. It's called The Emerging Counterforce. See, I've got a comment at the top, welfarism all the way.
Yeah.
But the interesting part about that, he talks about one group. This is one group in the States called the Farm Animal Welfare Coalition, FORC, right? And this group, this one group, because there's other ones for fur and this kind of stuff. So this is animal agriculture. And the members of this one group include the American Dairy Science Association, American Farm Bureau Federation, American Feed Manufacturers Association, American Meat Institute, American Society for Animal Science, American Veal Association, Animal Health Institute, Commission on Farm Animal Care, Farm and Industrial Equipment Institute, Holstein Association, Livestock Conservation Institute, Livestock Marketing Association, National Broiler Council, National Cattlemen's Beef Association, National Lamb Feeders Association, National Livestock and Meat Board, National Livestock Producers Association. Now, there's a few more. In fact, there's one. I don't know if you can see it, but I've got it kind of written back out again there, because there's so many of them that they actually made a typo and they put one in twice. So,
right.
But what I'm saying is that goes to show how much we're against this massive industry that we're against. Yeah. So they're obviously going to try to infiltrate. I mean, if they can't rely on the state to do it, they'll do it themselves. And now in the internet age, and this brings us back to George's video, I think, individuals are going to be able to do it dead easy now as well, because they'll just start a thing saying, I'm a vegan. And then, like he says, like all the cupcake kind of stuff and all that, and then start saying critical things.
Yes.
So, but I mean, it's kind of obvious in a way. I mean, they're so
not
powerful.
I think it's interesting that it's been brought up that this is something that could be happening, and I would say it pretty definitely is happening on social media, and that the industry. I think there's little doubt that the industry is involved in this, to be honest. But I also think it's not just the industry. I think you're right that it could be people as individuals that think I'm going to be clever and pretend to be a vegan and do this. I think that there are individuals that are capable of doing that. And I think also so it was interesting that the name of the person that was doing the posting it sounded like a really militant. They gave themselves like a really militant name, didn't they? Stand up against something, or didn't they? In the video,
in terms of their avatar thing, yes, that's right.
Yeah. So people would think, they're a right on kind of radical stroke militant, and then in terms of vegan, they were just in veganism. They were just the opposite. Whether that was to attract followers, to draw people in, that may well have been, because they certainly weren't, going along with that in what they were saying regarding vegan advocacy. But I think also, there are there are people who genuinely consider themselves to be vegan, who are also buying into this, and I think it's a kind of, I think what it is it's a kind of giving themselves an excuse not to be activists, and I think it's kind of very, very similar to the kind of excuses, in a sense, that people put forward not to be vegan, for not going vegan. And I think there's a similar psychology.
I think we're going to disagree on this, but carry on.
Yeah. In what I'm saying is that because it's in terms of like, and it's kind of to do with resistance to change. That's to me where the big similarity comes in. One of the reasons people resist going vegan, or certainly resist adopting like a vegan friendly diet, is they don't want to change. They want to carry on doing the same thing they've always done, and that's really quite a strong trait in humans that we kind of have to overcome if we're going to turn people vegan. You see, so they're kind of that's a big factor in people pushing back against against becoming vegan. But I think it's also a big factor in people pushing back against becoming activists, because to become an activist demands further change, and it especially demands kind of further change these days. And I often say that sort of back in the day, back in the like 70s and 80s, when we kind of started campaigning and began our activism, it was really it wasn't at all easy to operate in society as a vegan. It was almost impossible to eat out anywhere. There weren't any of these kind of what might be called, vegan friendly substitutes for meat and cheese and stuff like that. You couldn't get kind of any sort of, it's very difficult to get food that was kind of processed in any way. And almost all the bread contained beef fat and and so on and so on. So it's kind of difficult to for someone to kind of live as a vegan, they needed to be a very determined person, a very strong person, and so therefore it kind of became, it wasn't really a problem for most of those people to become activists, because they were kind of tough. They were tough, so the toughness needed, in a sense, and dedication needed to become an activist was already there in those people. And so in those days, when somebody, if somebody said they were a vegan, there was a much greater chance that person would be an activist than there is today, because to operate socially as a vegan is so much easier. You can just slot in. You can go for a meal at a pub with your non-vegan mates, and you can have a vegan option. You can go to the supermarket and buy something that looks exactly the same as what you ate when you weren't a vegan. You see, so it's kind of, and so therefore, a lot of people that I think become vegan these days haven't got that same strength. They haven't got that same strength as the as the vegans of old, and so they're still able to live this comfortable life that's kind of relatively stress-free, and where they don't have to put themselves out. And so if they feel a kind of, if they get a kind of pang of conscience in a way about not becoming an activist, where they see vegans who are active, on social media or elsewhere, they see these vegans being active vegan, spreading the vegan message, and they start, maybe getting a pang of conscience. Should I be doing that myself? Then they're going to formulate something in order to resist that. And a good thing to formulate is that activism actually does no good, and it gives them then an excuse not to be active.
Yeah, but I'm quite surprised you said this, Ronnie, because this is your position is for people to be activists all the time, but not necessarily. Yes. See, I think that we'll come back to what Jonas said as well, about, he said, I contrary to what George said, but you see, he talked about what works, and he talked about what activism is. And for him, it's showing slaughterhouse footage. And he's saying the reason that you do that is because you've got to make people feel guilty. And that's what activism is. And he even said we wouldn't have changed if we ourselves didn't feel guilty. Now, I think this is really problematic because it's not it's as though we've lost the ability to make the case for animal rights. What you've got to do is make people guilty instead, and this kind of stuff. Well, no, it's to do with rational argument.
Well, I would use the word responsible rather than guilty, because you see, you've got to make people feel responsible for the consequences of their actions. You've got people have got to realize that when they, when they go and buy animal products, they're actually paying someone else to kill an animal for them. People need to kind of make that connection. People need to make the connection.
People make that connection when they learn about what animal rights is.
But that isn't necessarily. I mean, that might be what George means by guilt. It's perhaps not exactly the same as guilt. It's kind of it's responsibility. And once again, we're coming back to the kind of the problems we've had with Animal Rising's approach, in that they don't want to put individual responsibility on anyone, and talk about we want system change, not individual change. Whereas what we would say, it's really down to the individual, because it's those it's individuals choosing to behave in a certain way that's causing the situation we're faced with. And so what we need to impress on people is that they as individuals are the actions they're taking as individuals are causing that situation to occur whereby other animals are oppressed. And so it's getting people to understand, because if people don't feel personally responsible for what's happening, then they'll see no reason not to go and buy animal products, because they won't see the connection. And it's getting them to make that connection. And perhaps that maybe.
I'm still quite surprised by your response to it, because I thought what you would say is the problem with George Martin's video is that he's saying activism is this.
Yeah, but yes, I mean but that's the kind of I kind of.
You're saying activism can be a lot easier than that, because
what I'm talking about is kind of two separate things. I think activism doesn't just involve persuading people to watch videos or showing there's a wide range of a wide range of other ways of educating people to become vegan other than videos. I think videos play a very important part. I mean, I know a lot of people that have become vegan because they watched one of those videos that George mentions, or that has played a part in them becoming vegan. But then I also know a lot of people that have become vegan because they read a leaflet, because they read an article, because they read a poster, they saw a poster, they saw an advert on telly. There's all sorts of reasons why, people become vegan, or that play a part, because I think often it takes several instances of exposure to the vegan message before somebody becomes vegan. So I think it's not just to sort of perhaps, I don't know whether George is implying that it's only those things that are important. But
it was a very strong part of the video.
I think that's the kind of that's the sort of world George operates in, isn't it? The world of videos. And I think a lot of younger people, this is because they've come to veganism that way, because they've come to veganism through watching a video, and also some kind of older people. I wouldn't necessarily say young vegans, but recent vegans. People that become vegan recently. There are a lot of them that watching a video like Dominion or Land of Hope and Glory, for instance, has played a major part in them becoming vegan. That is true. But there are also, I mean, I know people who become vegan have come up to me at the stalls I do and say to me that they became vegan after visiting a previous stall I did, and that was giving them written information, printed information, and that's how. I mean, they may have gone on to watch videos and stuff, I don't know, but certainly what kind of sparked their interest in going vegan was printed material. It wasn't a video. So I think there's a wide range of different ways in which we can educate people to become vegan. And it's important that we use all of them. and videos are an important part, but they're an important way of doing it, but they're not the only way.
Well, I want to come to what John was saying, but before that, I think this is very dangerous. If you've got a group of people who think that the idea is to make people feel guilty, and if you've got a generation of vegans who are vegan because they've been made to feel guilty, that means that they're susceptible then to animal welfareism, because along comes a campaign or a company and says, well, look, we can take your guilt away because our thing doesn't have all those terrible things that you've seen in the video. You know, it's all genuine free range and blah, 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 which is possibly why the activists are really kind of having a go at the RSPCA and Red Tractor and everything, because they want to keep it all on the guilt thing, saying, oh, well, you know, free range is terrible, you know. So I think there's a real danger here somewhere.
I think I think that comes down to the reason why I think it's important that people are made to feel responsible. Now, whether feeling responsible is the same as feeling guilty, I don't know. But it's important that people feel that, you know, they are responsible.
When you say made to feel responsible, what do you mean?
Well, that they learn of their connection, the connection of the actions they're taking to what is happening to the animals. In other words, if someone consumes animal products, the result of that is that this is what will happen to the other animals, right? People need to make that connection, otherwise they're not going to become vegan. Now, whether that's the same as guilt and whether that's what George means by guilt, I don't know. But people certainly need to make the connection between their actions, that they are individually responsible for their own actions and their own actions as consumers of animal products and consumers of other forms of the oppression of other animals.
Well, I think that what you've just said is an element of it, but I don't think it's all of it. And I think this comes back to this kind of thesis, really. And John is saying here, contrary to what George said, my conversion to vegetarianism and then veganism came without seeing any of the shock material or hearing shock jocks, you know. It was precisely due to non-preaching individuals. And what those people would be doing would be just explaining the position. Right. So
I think it means, I think preaching, I think things can be called preaching when they're not preaching. I think, you know, vegans can be accused of, I could be accused of preaching by just giving someone an information leaflet about veganism. Somebody say, oh, you're preaching, you know. So I think we've got to be careful of the word preaching, because I think people are accused of preaching when what they're doing isn't preaching, because it's done to kind of discredit those people who are active.
I think one of the fundamental problems, Ronnie, is that we're not an animal rights group movement. We're an animal welfare movement. And so that's why you want to shock everybody with the horrible things that happen. We're not capable of making the case for animal rights, which would then lead to people putting that part of the jigsaw together. Oh, I'm involved. But they would understand things like the injustice of it and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think it depends on the reason why somebody goes vegan, or the entirety of the reason that somebody goes vegan. If included in that reason is the fact that those animals are actually exploited and oppressed in the first place and sent for slaughter and used, if that's included in the reason as well as the suffering, then that person won't be a welfarist and won't accept welfare measures. It depends on the reason why that person, you know, has become vegan or has,
well, as you know,
decided
we haven't been a great success in creating an animal rights movement. I mean, we've got an animal welfare movement. Let's face it. You know,
I think it's really important to. I don't think there's anything wrong in showing people the suffering that the other animals go through. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think that can play an important part, but included in the message needs to be that the use of those animals itself is wrongful, and no matter, you know, how, you know, kindly, so to speak, they may be treated by their exploiters, at the end of the day they're still being used they're still being held captive, they're still being sent for slaughter, yeah, still being oppressed and exploited no matter what. And it's important for people to kind of understand that. Otherwise, people will use welfareism as a get out. They will kind of gravitate towards Red Tractor or RSPCA assured places, thinking, oh, you know, these animals are okay and there's no suffering, and so it's okay for me to buy those products.
It's not that they gravitate towards it. It's as much that we push them to it by the language we use. We talk about abuse, we talk about cruelty, we talk about being animal lovers and all this kind of stuff. We don't make the case for animal rights. What John is saying here is about this atrocity pornography. Well, in the kind of academic literature, they're talking about recruitment, the difference between moral shocks and networking. Well, if you do it by networking, you do it with this calm approach. You just explain it calmly. That you explain the case for animal rights. I'm not even sure that people can do it.
My own approach to activism is a calm approach. I mean, I don't use videos. I may give people information that's got the where they can, you know, that they can access, where they can use.
So how do you make them guilty without the videos?
To watch good. Well, it's not about it. It depends what's meant by guilt. If you're kind of explain to someone that they're, because it's their responsibility, is their choices are actually causing a certain situation. You know, how they're choosing to live, what they're choosing to consume, right? And also I think as well, their political attitudes and social attitudes are causing are leading to other animals being oppressed and exploited. If that is kind of, you know, this is their, you know, the responsibility of those people as individuals for kind of what is happening to other animals, and it's important that people recognise that. But I think they can be caused to recognise that. I don't think you need kind of shocking videos to. I mean, I didn't. I became vegan because I read an article, but the article did explain, you know, what I was already vegetarian, because obviously, and the reason I was went vegetarian was nothing to do with suffering. It was just to do with the fact that these animals were being used and were being killed. You know, I didn't become vegetarian because of suffering. I became vegetarian because of those animals being used and killed. That's why I became vegetarian. I didn't know about the dairy industry and the egg industry. When I found out about that, that's kind of when I went vegan. But the article that I read that caused me to go vegan did explain about how, you know, how the chicks are killed, how the hens are killed, and how the, you know, calves are taken from the cows, and how the cows are killed as well. That information was in those articles that caused me to go vegan, although it wasn't a video. It's just something I read. And I think it's kind of, you know, I think the language that accompanies these things is important, you know. And if what accompanies these things is only welfarist language, then I think there is a danger in that people think, well, that's horrible, but if I get stuff from RSPCA,
suffering is okay. Welfare language, Ronnie.
Sorry?
Suffering is welfare language.
Suffering is welfare language, but I think suffering's okay if suffering is okay if you also include slaughter with it. You don't say suffering on its own, because suffering is, you know, is part of the experience of many of those animals, and so I think it's important to talk about it, but it's also, you know, I talk about suffering and slaughter. I talk about oppression.
It can't be the main thing. It's a little bit like the guilt thing. It can't be the
It's not
the main thing. They you know, if you want people to become guilty, learn how to explain the case for animal rights, and then eventually they'll get there. But you don't start there in the same way as you don't start with cruelty or abuse or with suffering, because as soon as you do, they're going to then start, okay, well, what are the animal use industries that don't include these things? And our answer to that is there isn't any. right?
No, that's right.
Yeah, but the welfare argument is always yes, there is, and as soon as they get convinced by that, we've lost them. This might be
I kind of think it probably depends from person to person. I mean, I think there is no doubt that that those videos that show those things. I mean, I've never watched any of those videos because I'm already vegan. I don't need to. Why am I going to put myself through, images of animals, undergoing horrific treatments when I'm already vegan? Why would I traumatize myself by watching that? So I've never watched any of it. And I avoid. I purposely
the activism
avoid.
is not you watching it; it's you showing it to others.
Me showing it, no, and I don't show it, and a part of that is probably just, because I'm like an old school activist, and I've all been used to the leaflets and stuff like that, and that's how I carry on. But I do know people who become vegan and have gone on to become vegan activists, where the main reason, or that certainly they say the main reason for them going vegan, was watching one of those videos.
Well, yeah, okay, but I mean, but that's right. But in terms of what we say, I'm just saying that the strength of the animal rights argument comes by being able to explain what it is. So if we can get people to agree to the idea that other animals are rights bearers and that our use of them is a rights violation, then that's when they start to think, well, what role do I play in that?
But I don't think it's necessary. I don't think that it. You see, I talk about oppression and exploitation and use being wrong, and that humans don't do that. I take that approach rather than talking to people about rights. I think it's fine, to talk about rights. There's nothing wrong in that, and I agree with that. But that's not kind of how I approach it myself with people. I'm talking about that it's wrong for humans to use other animals for our own purposes. It's wrong to exploit them, wrong to oppress them, and so therefore we shouldn't, and therefore we should live in a way that whereby we don't do that. That's how I would approach it.
Yeah, well, it's wrong to oppress those who have rights. So
but if it's wrong to what I would do in a discussion with people is make the connection between the animals and humans, that what they consider was a wrongful act in terms of another human is also wrong in terms of doing that to an animal, because of the similarities that we have with the other animals. I mean, this is to do with speciesism, to do with human supremacism, and that's the language that I use.
Yeah, well, I mean, that would fit in with what Reagan does too.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right. So we've identified 4 areas. The media might infiltrate, although again, you're not going to get long-term infiltration.
They'll do it. The media will infiltrate for a story. They're after a story, so they wouldn't do the type of infiltration.
Maybe infiltrate is not the right word, because
they'll infiltrate. Well, the media, for instance, says the media infiltrated a meeting of Animal Rising, didn't they? And published a story about.
George was talking about shills, right? And I mean, I tell you one group of people that I think might be paid shills, which was one of the phrases that George uses, is those people who had a platform and then they announced that they're no longer vegan, right? And suddenly there seems to be a lot of indication that those people were being paid to say that, because suddenly they had a book contract and suddenly they were, getting on this media thing and getting on that media thing much more easier than when they were vegan. As soon as they're ex-vegan,
that they were recruited.
The machine that came behind them, right?
Yeah, but perhaps they were recruited. You see,
That's what I'm saying.
I've known quite a few instances of the police trying to recruit animal liberation activists, where people had been arrested.
Yeah, but we're not talking about the police angle. We're talking about the industry.
But the industry could do the same.
I mean, the police are not going to recruit and ex-vegan to talk about being an ex-vegan.
The police aren't the police aren't worried about vegan outreach because it's not illegal. Where we had the infiltration by the state into the animal liberation movement was in the days of the ALF, when there was this was heavily illegal activity, and so the state was interested. So the state wouldn't be too interested in infiltrating vegan outreach groups. But the industry
let's have a quick look at this, because I think this is one area that because we identified 4 media, individuals, groups, or the kind of user industries, and the police or the state. So this is the police state thing. Now I don't think that this is involved anymore in our movement, because I don't think that we're a threat to the state like we used to be.
Well, it was kind of in terms of preventing what they would consider seriously unlawful actions, in terms of what the ALF did, and then they kind of did the same with Shack, they did the same with Speak, because there was a lot of direct action connected with those campaigns, even though it may not have been organised by those campaigns. It was certainly done in support of those campaigns.
And I think it also to do with the people involved, because this was the time when there was kind of no doubt about it, really, that the movement was much more left-leaning than it is now. And so therefore, the people that they were infiltrating were generally people on the left. And so that gave them a wide, going back to London Greenpeace, that wasn't just an animal rights group. It was environmentalism and justice issues across the board. So they were kind of leftists, right?
I think so. I wouldn't describe Shack as a particularly left group in terms of what you might talk about the leadership of Shack. I wouldn't have called them particularly.
That was late. That was pretty late on anyway.
That was later on. Yeah.
So, you know all about the Animal Rights National Index. So for people watching, these are the groups that were formed by the state, the police, in order to monitor and hopefully infiltrate and control and eventually kind of stop the growing animal liberation movement, really. And so as far as I know, and this gives us some idea about some of their names: National Coordinator, Domestic Extremism, all this kind of stuff, terrorism and allied matters. That's the TAMS thing. But as far as you know, Ronnie, are these groups still even going? I wouldn't have.
I don't know. They may, because now you've got this other thing, haven't you? What is it? Prevent. You've got a thing called Prevent, right? Which they set up, which is kind of a lot to do with. They kind of have quite a lot of involvement in schools and in education, and it's like
who set up the police?
It's a thing called Prevent. It was set up by the state here in the UK. And what it is, it was kind of set up on the pretext. It was to do with really what they call Islamic fundamentalism was the main kind of driver of it, kind of, sort of prevents, young people being
radicalized,
being, I suppose, involved in those movements. And but
I'd be very surprised if our movement was even on their radar anymore.
It kind of is, to a small, because what they did was they published different a list of organizations that they considered to be kind of worrying, and I think one or two of them were animal rights organizations. I can't remember exactly who was kind of on their list. But in a small way they were, and part of the part of their program for this kind of de-radicalization, so to speak, of people did include that there was, they showed articles from newspapers that kind of typified the type of thing that they were worried about. And I think one of the articles was about some kind of direct action, like an ALF type action. So that is included in this overall scheme to some extent, but only really in a quite it kind of tends to focus on Islamic fundamentalism, and then to a certain extent on far right groups, and there's a little bit of the animal rights in there as well.
Just anybody who might be troublemakers. But going back to Camp Beagle, do you think it would be the industry people in there or the cops?
Well, if anyone was to kind of infiltrate Camp Big, I mean, they're kind of in terms of somewhere like the actual like camp itself. The only way that I could see it possibly happening is somebody an infiltrator. Perhaps it was an agitator who kind of stirred people up there and got them arrested. So they did things to get arrested, so that thereby the camp would be like destroyed, because they, the people at Camp Beagle have to be careful, because if they overstep a certain line, then the authorities could remove the camp, because that camp exists there really because the authorities have kind of allowed it to remain. It's on a grass verge, which kind of comes under the auspices of the Highways Authority, I think. It's at the side of the road. So obviously they've allowed them to remain there. And they've also put up they've created a 30-mile-an-hour limit where the camp is, to slow the cars down as they go past the camp.
The fact that it's still there indicates that they're not that worried about it.
Yeah, because I don't think they're worried about it, because it's not. It kind of isn't. It isn't a threat to MBR Acres, where it's set up. It isn't a threat. The vans just going in and out. Going out of there, taking the dogs to the roads. That's still happening. Well, it kind of casts a spotlight on it. It creates public awareness. Yeah, a few people have gone vegan because they've gone there and rubbed shoulders with the vegans there. And
so, if you've got anybody in there from the other side, it's more likely to be the industry than people.
It would probably be the industry, maybe in terms of information gathering. I would think that kind of is a, I suppose is a possibility. But I think the something like Camp Beagle is a threat to the industry in a much more general way. I don't think that they're too much of a threat in terms of closing MBR Acres, because they're not actually really causing any disruption to what's happening that in that facility. I think where they're a threat to the industry is in a much more general way, in raising public awareness, raising public concern about.
Isn't there? There's been a couple of break-ins and liberation.
Yeah, but not by the people at Camp Beagle. It was people from Animal Rebellion / Animal Rising that went there. The Camp Beagle
place, the actual physical
same
location.
place, but the Camp Beagle, the people at the camp had no involvement in that.
Yeah,
they try to keep within the law because they want the camp to remain there. And if they started law breaking, then the authorities would soon remove that camp, because authorities have got the power to remove that camp, but they've chosen to just allow it to stay there.
Okay.
You see.
Okay. So we've I think we've had mainly about 6 people, sometimes between 4 and 6 people. So I think what's happened is that when we kind of crashed and started again, it kind of destroyed all the push notices. And I also think that we're only streaming now. In fact, I hope we still are actually, but I think we're only streaming now to my YouTube channel.
Yeah, I think the thing that with these shows, I think it's great that people watch live, and I think the comments can be really useful and important and provoke really good discussion, and that's why it's good that it's a live stream. But I think far more views come from the shares, where it's shared on social media afterwards. That's where the vast majority of views come from.
Okay. The last thing, and this is to go back to George Martin's video. The last thing I wanted to talk about, because we're over the hour now, is the argument was that these paid shills are there to persuade people not to do the kind of activism that George Martin is saying is the best that you can do, and talk about recipes and all the rest of it. Now, the interesting thing about that is that what extent does people like Tobias Leonhardt, Melanie Joy, the people who would actually say don't do the AV type stuff. You don't need to show the horrible videos. In fact, you're probably better off not even calling yourself vegan. I mean, their group, which is only a few years old, pro-veg, right? So they're still operating on the idea that veganism is a scare word. So they would say, well, look, we're not paid shills. It's just that we don't agree with what you say is what we must be doing.
But you see, I wonder if that comes down to something personal about themselves. In other words, that they themselves don't want to be like that. So they therefore, in order to strengthen their own feelings about themselves, they try to persuade other people to be the same as them.
You mean you don't believe them then?
No, I think that's the kind of their psychological motivation for doing what they do. You know, in other words, they it's like where Tobias Leonhardt talks about it's kind of okay to have like backyard chickens and stuff if you give them a good life. Like, you know, he did that in a speech, didn't he? Not that long ago.
Yes, his new speech. Yeah,
yeah,
10
yeah.
things I've changed my mind about.
And is that because that's what he wants to do? That's how he feels. So in order to kind of bolster his own feelings, he wants other people to kind of feel the same as him.
He would say that he's a strategist. So it's not anything to do with his personal things. It's to do with what works, right? And he's always claimed that he, as a veganish person, is much better at bringing around veganism than purists, because he'd call me and you purists, right? He'd also say that his version of veganism, which to us is not veganism, his version means that the vegan movement would be massive compared to what it is now, because he would obviously allow the consumption of products derived from other animals, right? So, but that would be his way of making the vegan movement larger, right? And then you're moving people on to then eventually 30 years hence, then we can talk about what we would say is veganism.
But you don't move people on to oppose the exploitation of other animals by telling them that some exploitation of other animals is okay.
Well, it's a step-by-step, incremental, baby step thing. But I mean, that's what they would say, that you get them there eventually. And another thing they would say, and Leonhardt says this explicitly, is it's a mistake to tell them that veganism is the final destination. You don't need to tell them that bit. You should just talk about, you know, having great food, being nice, and
you see, my position is totally opposed to that. I think we've got to very, very clearly say it as it is. We've got to talk about human supremacism. We've got to constantly say that humans are not more important than other sentient animals. Then there's no logical or moral reason for, like, you know, having that viewpoint. We've got to shout that from the rooftops. We've got to spread that everywhere. We've got to spread the word vegan everywhere.
Obviously, I'm going to agree with you, Ronnie. It goes back to the initial post of that person that George was complaining about, and then answered, and then got blocked and everything. That person was basically given a kind of Leonhardt type line, kind of go easy, don't do that, do this, slim it down, moderate it, and all this kind of stuff. And there seems to be quite a lot of people who have actually bought into that. I mean, Leonhardt's position is probably, from our point of view, scarily popular in the animal welfare movement.
I think it gives people an easy life to adopt that position, because it means they don't really have to do a lot, and they don't really have to change, and they don't really have to put themselves out. And once again, we're back to this.
If you believe that, though, and you come to believe that, I mean, I remember back in 2015 when James Aspey came to Dublin to give talks. I was sat with him for a couple of hours, because he came to the VIP gazebos first. The day before, I think. And he promised me that he would read The Case for Animal Rights. And then the next thing, there was a picture of him on a beach reading Leonhardt's book. Right. And so if you get convinced that the extremists, the purists, is not the way to go, then you would get people writing that kind of thing. And it's nothing to do with being a shill. It's that you believe that to be the best way towards veganism.
Oh yes. I don't necessarily think that everyone who writes those things is a shill. I think there's little doubt that there are shills. Really, when you look at it, you've got a vast industry that's very wealthy.
Well, with people like Leonard around, you don't need to have any shills. I mean, they're just doing the shill job, aren't they?
I think we do have them anyway. I mean, I think George is right that these people do exist, and that's the sort of thing that they want to do. But I think it's they're not all shills. I think there are other people doing this who and I think he kind of did say that in the video, that kind of people who consider themselves vegan have kind of joined in with that, because I think they find that easy for themselves. It's an easier way, isn't it? If like kind of
it would fit with your thesis about there's a lot more vegans who are normal people now.
Normal people. I don't want to like go out on I don't want to go out on a ledge. I don't want to be all that different. I can go to the cafe with my mates and I can eat something that looks just the same as them. I can go to the supermarket and get something that just looks exactly the same, tastes exactly the same as what I've always done. So my life has changed in really, really, really in a small way. Years ago, when you became vegan, your life had to change absolutely radically, and you became right on the outside of society. You were an outsider.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying, Ronnie. That's why the agents of the state are going to take much more notice of us then than now.
Because we were more of a threat.
These are just cupcake vegans, right? I mean,
we were more of a threat because in order to get animal liberation, really true animal liberation, the whole system has to change absolutely radically. And it's not just about people eating like a cake. Cake suitable for vegans instead of a one containing animal products. It's like demands much more radical, far-reaching changes than that. That's what they're afraid of. They're not afraid. Corporations, like corporate business, isn't frightened of someone kind of choosing like a plant-based version of an animal product. Those companies themselves are producing them. I mean, like Richmond, a big sausage company, they produce sausages suitable for vegans. Frey Bentos, horrific animal oppression with huge factories for processing other animals and stuff like that. They brought out pies, vegan-friendly pie from Frey Bentos. Because what they do, they go with the flow. As long as they can make money. All right, if that's the way you make money, is kind of producing some vegan friendly products, so to speak.
Yeah, well, quite. That's
whether they really are vegan friendly, of course.
Some of the more influential of the influencers, or the ones with the bigger platforms, they go out their way to advertise McDonald's and KFC and stuff. Yeah. So I mean, again, then they're not. I mean, who's going to care about what they're doing in terms of from a surveillance point of view? They're not, are they?
Well, if kind of all people are doing is just trying to educate someone to consume products that stuff that doesn't contain animal products rather than stuff that does. If that's kind of like all they're doing, then that isn't there's different levels of where your threat is. In other words, that is a threat to animal agriculture.
Yeah, it's not a state threat, is it?
And it is a threat.
Have you ever heard Joey Cardstrong saying, kind of learn to burn? I mean, you don't get that kind of rhetoric in the movement anymore, and the chances of them looking at us so closely now, and so it's got to be what George said it is, which is that you've just got people sticking their oar in and trying to kind of slow us down or redirect it, or throw in a bit of confusion and stuff.
Because you see, there are different levels of corporate interest. if you see what I mean. There's a level of animal agriculture and the farming lobby and the fishing industries, right? And they're the type of people that would try to, in a sense, they wouldn't even want people, they wouldn't even want people just changing their diet, because that is going to impact on that's going to impact on their industries. But even more than that, they don't want people advocating that other people, change their diet and doing things that would persuade people to do that, because, that kind of, that will impact on them. But at a higher level, in terms of corporate interests, they don't mind. They don't care what happens as long as money can still be made. If you see what I mean. Like the farming lobby, the people that support, like, the farming of other animals, or the fishing of other animals, are going to be concerned about people that are, like, promoting a vegan friendly diet, because that's going to impact on the industries. But people at a higher level than that kind of, are maybe using the products from those businesses, using the products from animal agriculture, using the products from the fishing industry. It's not going to affect them so much, because all they'll do is just switch to plant-based products and sell them instead. So they're not they're not so threatened by people just changing their diets, because they'll just bring in products that they can sell to make money out of that, as we've seen, like loads of products in you can't, I don't think you can buy you can't buy a plant milk in a supermarket that's not produced by a dairy company or by a company.
Okay, so hang on a minute then. You're now saying that there isn't any of these industry infiltrators, because
no. What I'm saying, it depends on the level of industry. There is a level of industry, like the farm, the people that are making money out of farming, whether that's intensive farming, other sorts of farming, the people that are making money out of the fishing, yes, they will be interested in doing that infiltration. But the people on the higher level of like, of corporate interest, the people that are kind of taking the products from the ones that can diversify into creating plant-based products, aren't going to be so threatened by it, because all they'll change, if more people start consuming a plant-based diet, they'll just start supplying that, and they'll still make their money. And we're seeing that.
If you talk about small, medium, and large,
I'm talking about levels of corporate interest, and I'd say that the ones that are doing the infiltration are like perhaps a middle level. They're not the big corporates. That they don't care, as long as people consume and spend money. Then they'll kind of adjust.
They won't care.
They won't care.
Right. I think we ought to bring this disastrous show to a close.
Well, it's. I mean, you haven't. It might be interesting to bring up the article from the Guardian, and I think Jonah mentioned it earlier, wasn't there? I don't know whether you've got that. I
don't have it to hand.
I've got. There was an article in the Guardian. And what it is was, it's a recent article about how
European Livestock Voice
about laws to basically limit, I suppose, intensive farming of animals in the European Union have been kind of, put on the back burner, or delayed, or suspended, or whatever. And it's an article in the Guardian, very recent, and in 2021 EU politicians agreed to phase out the use of cages for rearing farmed animals, and this was hens, broilers, pigs, calves, rabbits, quail, after they received a petition signed by more than 1 million people. And these measures, they said these measures had the support of 89% of European citizens, according to a survey. But what happened was the farming lobby came together to combat this through various means, and dirty dealings and different things like that. And there was a lobby group formed called the European Livestock Voice. And what they did, and what was interesting, what they did was, it says it was set up as an activist style network using tactics borrowed from NGOs such as flash mobs, Twitter campaigns, and social media organizing. So here we have an example of a pro animal use organization, using social media to
that's
to
there,
kind of
isn't
push
it?
their
That one
message.
there.
So this kind of ties in, quite a lot with George's video, and very, very interesting. It says this guy that was the front man of this organization. He said, "We are speaking about culture a lot when we speak about livestock. Culture in terms of our behavior, our habits. It's a very cultural, sociological, and philosophical subject in terms of our approach." You see, so they're kind of taking from their side the approach that we'd advocate from our side, like we're wanting to change the culture, and we see the really important necessity of changing the culture if we're ever going to achieve animal liberation. But what they're trying to do is to take action to maintain the existing culture.
Yeah, keep the status quo.
Keep the status quo, but by using similar methods to the methods we would use in many cases to change the culture. In other words,
Well, you can't help thinking that their title is a bit revealing. Is it European Livestock Voice? And is that an answer to AV, do you think?
It may have been. It may have been. Well, it's a bit of a more modern name, isn't it? It's not like Society for,
all the ones
livestock.
that I read out before about the livestock.
Yeah, no, it's a more modern name, isn't it?
Yeah.
More social media savvy kind of name. A voice, say voice. Don't say organisation, or don't say,
Foundation or anything, yeah.
Institute or something. Say voice. You see, and this is where they kind of caught on, and you often find that they come a little bit late to the table in these things. It's a bit like the state. So, back in the days of the ALF and direct action, the state took a while to catch up, to understand how it operated, to understand,
They should have called themselves European Livestock not infiltrators, but
because obviously that's a big part of, you see, and it takes a while sometimes for these bodies, these organizations to kind of catch on to kind of how we operate, or how we've operated at any particular period of time. It takes them a while to catch on, but then they do catch on, and they formulate a strategy of how to kind of combat the animal liberation movement in various aspects of our movement. And they will be formulating organizations on this level that are wanting the status quo to continue in terms of farming animals, and in terms of the fishing industry as well. They are going to be worried about vegan outreach, and they are going to take measures to try and undermine it, and to try and undermine activism. Of course they are.
Yeah, well, as long as we remain an animal welfare movement, I don't think we're much of a threat to them, but never mind.
Well, I think that anything that undermines, vegan outreach is kind of harmful. And I mean, it's certainly harmful to kind of what I believe is that we need vegan outreach everywhere as much as possible and all over the place. No, in many different forms. And I think that, those forms would include videos.
Actually, just a final point for me would be, I wonder whether George Martin would recognize your outreach as activism.
Well, I think what I'd say, I kind of don't know who that's speaking to, but I know George is involved with We the Free, and I think
but that's holding screens and that, isn't it?
Yeah, they're holding screens, but I think also they kind of although that's their main the main thing they do, I think they've also kind of had workshops and stuff where they promoted other forms of activism apart from that. So I wouldn't say that We the Free, although that's their main, the main thing they do.
So what other types?
Well, pretty much everything. Pretty much all forms of vegan outreach, I think, including printed materials and stuff. I mean, I think they're not opposed to that. It's from what I gather and from what I understand. But it's just not it's just not the main way they operate. I think they tend to believe that perhaps people are more tuned in to videos, that you're more likely to kind of change people through videos and through other things. I think that's kind of
if George ends up watching this, which is unlikely, I imagine, but if he does, maybe you could drop a line and saying,
I mean, I wouldn't
is door dropping.
I would think that I would hope he's in favour of all forms of outreach, and people have their particular focus, don't they? I mean, I have my particular focus. I don't really, I'll give people information about where they can watch videos, but I don't show videos because that's the way I'm used to doing things. That's what I feel comfortable with. Other people prefer different types of activism, and I think it kind of, all of it's valid as long as it's stuff that's educating people to become vegan. I think it's
You know what? I think this is a very valid point. Plan B mode, where they can't win an argument, they'll just want to waste our time. It's because I've noticed that you're kind of trying to have a serious discussion about serious things, and they say ridiculous things, and non sequiturs, and going off track, and almost like nothing in their response will respond to anything that you've said. Right.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I think there are people that go on social media just to mess about. They've got nothing better to do with their time, and they would certainly, take part in that type of commenting, I'd say.
Well, they're doing the industry job then, aren't they? For them.
Yeah, they're doing whether they're actually from the industry,
or otherwise,
maybe they are. But yes, I mean, if anything that gets in the way of us spreading the vegan message as far as possible is harmful.
Yeah, but or as was said there, just having a kind of sensible, calm, reasonable conversation. Even that seems to be disrupted.
But you see that's also spreading the message. If you're putting forward like a rational and logical argument for veganism, that's likely to, people may well that are kind of.
Now, I mean, obviously, we can interpret that as, they just can't argue, or they don't have any arguments against veganism or anything. But if you did have people paid to do that, it does kind of work in the sense that the conversation just kind of fizzles out because it can't go anywhere. Because
there is no logical or rational argument against veganism. There isn't, and so when it gets to the stage where they can no longer kind of.
So okay, so who are the people arguing against veganism? That becomes the question, doesn't it?
It's kind of.
Are these more the shills, or are they just individuals who?
Well, I think this was more specifically to do with. You get people arguing against veganism, or I like my meat, and we need to eat meat, and you die. All vegans are going to die after a year.
Yeah, but you don't know if. I mean, that's what a shill would say too.
A shill might say that to kind of start with, but I think you see, what kind of George refers to is a bit more sophisticated in that, that they realise that these people are personally vegan and that they're going to stick personally to their veganism. What they don't want is those people to become active and to educate more people to become vegan.
Well, there's a Facebook group in Dublin. And they had a long thread where a lot of them were arguing against activism of the type that was done in Dublin, which is just mainly banners and leaflets and stuff, on the same grounds as was expressed in that.
Yeah. You see, this is it. That preaching, they think just giving someone a leaflet and having a friendly conversation with someone about veganism is preaching. And the reason they call it preaching is because they don't want to do it themselves.
And also, it makes them look bad
it makes them look bad
that
because
either.
they're not doing it. So
Yeah.
the way that they excuse themselves from not doing it is to somehow make out that it doesn't work or that it's a bad thing.
Or it makes the movement look bad.
But it makes the movement look bad. So that's
Yeah.
their excuse for not doing it because they personally don't want to do it.
Yeah, well,
But
I can see that part of
yeah.
it. I can see
Yeah,
that
yeah,
part.
and that is a guilt thing. That is like a guilt thing. I feel guilty about not doing it. So how can I assuage my guilt? How can I make myself not feel guilty? What I'll do is make out or find some excuse to think that
But it doesn't rule out, of course, Ronnie, that they actually believe what they've said.
Well, it doesn't. Well, yeah, but you see, how can
I know you don't like that argument.
no, but you see, I'd say, well, look, why do you believe that? How did you become vegan? You received information, didn't you? And then, so the more people that are putting out information promoting veganism in all its various forms, the more people are going to become vegan, because that's how you became. No one like woke up one morning and thought, I'm going to be a vegan without reading something, seeing something, hearing something.
I don't think even the more cupcakey vegan would say this movement should not put any information out. I mean, nobody's going to say that.
But you see, but what they're saying is that basically that anyone that tries to put out information to the public is a preacher. You know, when they talk about preachers, it isn't just to do with people showing videos. It's, you know, I'd be accused of being a preacher because I do stalls and give people, you know, give people recipe booklets that's got information also in it about, you know, the ethics of veganism, or giving people leaflets or just talking to people in a friendly way about it. I'd be accused of being a preacher for that. You know, because those people don't want to even do that. And so how can I kind of find this excuse to justify me not doing it?
The thing is, though, you always jump to that assumption, which might not necessarily be true. Right?
Well, yeah, but you see, but if you have a discussion with that person and say to them, how did you become vegan? Did you just wake up one morning and you were vegan? Or did you read something? Did you watch something? Did you hear something that caused you to become vegan?
But they
and of
won't
course,
be opposed to reading or watching or hearing anything.
But you see,
what you're doing, isn't it?
The thing that they read or watched or heard, somebody produced that, somebody disseminated that. That just doesn't appear by magic. So somebody. And so was that person a preacher? Was the person who produced the information that they read or saw or heard and caused them to go vegan, was the person who produced that, was that person a preacher?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the point is, do they think of something like Earthlings as a documentary or somebody preaching at them?
Well, I just think it's like anyone that kind of goes out of their way to promote veganism is accused of being a preacher, because
is this a product of preaching, or is it just a book?
Well, no. If somebody was disseminating that book, I mean, see that book's, there's no purpose in that book unless someone sells it, unless someone promotes it, unless it's got into the hands of the public, is it? Right. So is the person that's doing that dissemination a preacher?
So maybe that's how they became vegan. They're members of Animal Aid. They're members of the Vegan Society. They say there's a new book by so they went and purchased
But why did they? How did they join Animal Aid in the first place? They must have seen some information. Somebody spread some information somewhere about Animal Aid. Was that person a preacher?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you know, obviously we're kind of speculating about their psychology here.
But you're providing information. If someone actively is providing information to others, and that activism, you know, might be in the street, it might be on the internet.
I've got a feeling, Ronnie. I've got a feeling that they would say not all of it is preaching, but some of the stuff is, and that's the stuff I don't like. I think that's what.
But they don't want to do any of it. These people don't want to.
Oh yeah, but that's not what the deal is. They're just saying some stuff is preaching, which I don't like. Other stuff isn't, which I do.
Well, if that's what they're saying, but I kind of, you know, I've known of people call themselves vegan that think that any kind of going out there, putting yourself out and going out into the public is preaching. Even if you're just doing an information stall and giving people leaflets, they consider that as preaching, because to call it preaching is their excuse for not doing it themselves, because they're not doing it themselves and they don't want to.
Yeah, okay. So I understand that is your interpretation.
There may be some that think the video is the preaching and me giving out a leaflet isn't preaching, but like kind of, I think that they, the people that don't want vegan outreach to be spread don't want any of it. They don't want me.
I mean, like, the challenge for me would be, okay, well, Ronnie thinks it's because they don't want to personally get involved, blah, blah, blah. And you're saying there might be other reasons. So what are they? So that's the challenge to me, isn't it? I'd have to come up with, I mean, you've got what you think is the dominant reason they won't do it.
Well, I think, I think I think there could be people from the industry. I'm sure there are that are doing it, as George,
No, but I mean, we talk about the vegan one, the vegan ones,
yeah. In terms of people who are in terms of people who are vegan themselves, or who consider themselves vegan, shall we say, who don't do activism themselves, don't want to do activism, and accuse other activists of being preachers, right? I would say that they're doing that to assuage their conscience because they know they should do it. And I could say that's the overwhelming reason, because unless they're kind of, they're kind of not remembering how they became vegan. They're not remembering the process by which they became vegan. Was the person who wrote the article in the magazine that I read that caused me to become vegan, was that person a preacher?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I find it difficult to make this kind of, you're a preacher if you're with an information stall. I mean, it's easier when you look at the kind of the screen situation where people are kind of, giving out on the street type of thing. That is much easier to give that label to. Just passing out information, that doesn't.
Well, you see, if someone said to me, I think those people, I don't like those people with the screens, they're preachers, I'd say, okay, so what are you doing to spread the vegan message? All right, you don't like the screens, but how about you doing some door dropping? How about you doing an information store?
Well, the thing we don't know in this scenario is whether they think door dropping is preaching, do we?
Yeah, I think they think anything's preaching that they themselves don't want to do. You see, because that's their excuse that they've made to themselves not to do it. You see, because I'd say if they think, oh, that's preaching, now I don't agree with that, showing that video. I don't agree with that. That's okay. Well, what isn't preaching?
You've talked in the past, Ronnie, that there are some people, you've said in your group that you've got some people who won't do AV type stuff, but they will do door.
Yeah. Well, yes, but you see, that isn't to do with them being opposed to AV. It's to do just with their own personal circumstances. In other words, they don't do it because they, for someone in our area to do AV, they'd have to.
So you don't know anybody who's kind of ideologically opposed to screens?
I don't know. I don't know anyone personally. I mean, I can understand where someone might say, well, I think that showing people graphic images just puts them off and makes them run away rather than take notice. I can understand someone having that position, but that isn't a position that's against outreach as such. Because I say, all right, well, then what about outreach?
Well, they could give you some. But if it was graphic images, then maybe they're thinking about the graphic images in the leaflets that you're giving out as well.
Well, there are, but you see, when we do door dropping, we deliberately don't use graphic images. Because
do they know that? Do they know that?
Well, yes, because they're shown what the leaflet is.
No, I'm just trying to get into their.
But I don't think it's anything to do with any of that. I think it's just that they're comfortable in this lifestyle, but they're not activists. They don't want to put themselves out. Yeah. I don't think it's that.
You
Oh, I
decided
don't
that
like.
you've got them completely sussed and you're not having
Yeah,
it any other
no, I
way.
don't think it's really to do. I think there may be some people that say, well, I'm not keen on showing graphic images to people. I mean, and I think there is a kind of. I mean, I remember there was this day of action against the fishing industry. I think it might have been organised by Animal Aid. A few years ago, and they were getting people all over the country to like educate people about the fishing industry. And so we did a stall locally in support of that, and they sent us some posters, and the posters were like so horrific that I thought people are just going to they're not going to come up to the stall. They're just going to go, I don't want to see that. It's just so horrible. So I had to make my own posters of like just pictures of fish swimming in the sea, and did a thing, something about sign our petition to protect fishes or something like that. And then they come up to the stall, and then I was able to give them more information, because I thought that was going to attract more people than having these graphic images that where people are going to run away.
Ronnie, do you remember, this is years ago now, 80s, do you remember the yellow Animal Aid poster, which was of a monkey who had been irradiated? And it was the most horrible thing.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
yet we had that on the stalls in Liverpool. I remember that.
Well, I think it's... I think it kind of depends on, like... I think where people are kind of showing the videos, I think it depends. I think different forms of outreach work for different people. And I think we've got a thing with graphic images. I think like it's particularly in the video, some people would be interested, because I think one of the things that attracts people with something like Cube of Truth is curiosity. It's quite a strange. It's quite a strange.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's that argument about kids, but if I think back to Liverpool, and the fact that we used to hire these kind of generators, and we used to use an old video, and that we used to show 7 hours of a badger baiting, right, and it would make anybody's hair curl. It was much worse than slaughterhouse footage, but I mean, we just showed it, on the street in those days.
Well, yeah,
I can't remember thinking. I can't remember anybody objecting, but I also can't remember any of us in the group thinking, "Oh, is that a good idea?" We just thought it was,
No, I think there is this idea, like you show people that that kind of makes people, and I think that could work with some people. With other people, this is why I advocate this sort of like wide range of different forms of outreach, because I think different outreach appeals to different people in terms of doing it, but I think it also appeals to different people in terms of changing them. Different things work better with someone. It might be a video.
I'm surprised, Ronnie, that we didn't get a public order offence, because I mean it was absolutely horrendous, this stuff. I mean, it was actually given to us from, there was a court case where I think the league took some badger baiters to court, and they showed the court, or the video was available to the court, and somebody who was a friend of a magistrate and also part of the league and Sea Shepherd, they managed to get a copy of the video, which we then started showing on the street. But in terms of kind of public decency and everything, I mean, like nowadays you just think, whoa,
Well, I think it only take one person to complain. I mean, we were doing a while back when I was involved in the Greyhound campaign. We were doing a protest outside the Coventry dog track, which is thankfully closed. It's been gone for housing, and closed some while ago. But we had these like boards, and one of them was just, I didn't think it was particularly graphic. It just showed a pile of dead greyhounds, where all these greyhounds had been, had been euthanized, been killed because they were no longer wanted by the industry.
Like a dead pile, yeah.
Like a big dead pile. And the the bloke, the owner of the dog track, complained to the police, and they came and said, look, these are offensive posters. And I said, well, do you go and tell the butcher to kind of, pull down the shutters because he's got these.
That's exactly what Declan said. This copper came up once. This is years ago. I mean, it must have been 10 years ago. This copper came up and said, don't you think this is a bit too much? And Declan said, well, what about people walking past the butcher's shop?
Exactly. And that's what I said. But he said, no, you've got to remove the boards, right? And Louise ended up being arrested because she lay in the road blocking the entrance to the dog track. And ended up being arrested and taken to Rugby police station.
That'd just be a weekly thing, wouldn't it, with Luke?
She kind of, and I had to go. They released her without charge, but in protest, and they were going to confiscate the boards. So I had to come to agreement with them. I thought they confiscate the boards, never getting back. So I said, well, look, if you give me back the boards, I promise you we won't display them.
Yeah, well, before we get into my board is more graphic than your board.
Yeah, I know, but that's just an example of like what I'm saying about things being considered graphic when they're probably not really graphic.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm getting complained at by a very hungry cat. So,
but I think there's an interesting comment by Jonah about this. I saw this article in the Guardian today about UK meat consumption. So it's lowest level since
records began. It says data reveals
whether that's entirely due to poverty. I think they said it was to do with lifestyle. I think it's probably due to a number of factors. I mean, some meat is very, very inexpensive. The most unhealthy meat isn't it?
Well, I mean, is that part of the argument that the fact is that a lot of people now won't have the really shite stuff?
It could be that. I think it's a combination. It'd be interesting to perhaps. I don't know when our next news show is going to be, but it might be interesting to look at that article in more depth. On the news show,
because it's the kind of class thing has broken down quite a lot, hasn't it? And maybe the more people who would identify maybe as a working class community, then the general kind of quality of the stuff that they had might have been pretty ropey. Whereas now it's much more. I think people are a bit more tuned into food
I think a healthy vegan diet can be incredibly cheap because if you're making stuff from basic ingredients, because every time something gets processed, it adds to the cost. You've got to pay for the processing costs, haven't you? So if making stuff from vegan food from basic ingredients is absolutely the cheapest way to eat, and that's far cheaper than any type of meat.
Poverty made me go plant-based originally. This Deem Stars.
I can understand.
Lovely picture there on the avatar, isn't it?
It is. I can. I can understand that. I can understand that because but you see, I think the problem these days is that a lot of people don't really know how to cook, or I think cooking's kind of been mystified into something that's complicated when it needn't be.
Yeah, but yet there's more cookery programs on the telly now than ever.
Yeah, but a lot of it. But there was another article actually in the Guardian today, which was complaining that a lot of these cookery programs, that the food is expensive, it's complicated, and it's high in meat content. So it's not that they're not kind of.
So it might be a TV spectacular, but nobody's going to do it.
TV. I'm going to cook this steak with all these expensive ingredients. And that, when really, if they just should show people how to make like a stir fry with kind of chickpeas or something, that would be much. That would be A, healthier, B, obviously, better for the other animals, better for the environment, and much more affordable. But they don't do that. Well, they tend
right. So, are we done? Otherwise, I'm going to invite you to do a minute monologue while I go and feed the cat.
No, I think. Well, I've got to go and do a wee in a minute. Unless I do one here.
Okay.
So it would be a good time to. Would be a good time.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the few people that have stayed with us. I think we lost a lot because of the technical problems. So
they'll be able to watch it on when it's shared and
we'll have to share this one a bit more. I suppose.
Yeah.
Also, I'll have a look at the recording, see how the beginning is, because it might be a good idea maybe to delete the one and then put it back up again.
What might be an idea is to edit the recording. Edit bits out.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
And then put it up as a fresh recording that can be shared.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll edit all your bits out and make it shorter.
Edit all my blabbering on stuff. Yeah.
All right then, people. So we shall be back. We don't know when, and we don't know. I suppose it's the news thing next time, but I don't know whether it's going to be a fortnight or a week. I'm not quite sure.
Well, we've got to decide whether it's next week or we'll definitely be back within the next 2 weeks, won't we?
Oh yeah, one of those. Yeah. Okay.
We don't know.
And of course, we will be back, providing, Ronnie.
we are still alive.